everyone, and welcome to our session today on the remote connected worker. Today in the future. My name is Janice Abel, and I'm the principal consultant at ARC Advisory Group. Our speakers today will give you practical examples about where they have implemented remote connected workers over the past year and even previously, and their experiences with that. And so afterwards, our speakers will all join us for a panel session, and you can ask them questions. And these people are real experts on this, and they have done a lot of work in this area around the people and the technologies, and they can share some of the things that happened while they were doing their remote connected workers. So, what are people doing? Well, there's a lot of challenges that were solved very quickly around COVID, and even past post COVID, there'll be other challenges that will be resolved around the connected worker now and in the future. And those operational challenges, also technologies that are being advanced because of the remote connected worker and the benefits and the strategies for success. So, during COVID, we did a survey and we did it the second week in March because we knew that COVID was going to be a longer event than I think people had originally suspected. And then we also did it the first week in April, and we did it jointly with automation.com. And so we asked an open ended question. That was probably the most interesting question, I think. But we asked if you could do something differently or the same in operations regarding people, processes, and technologies to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. What would you do, or are you already doing, or wish you had done differently? So, what we found was that anybody that could work remotely at home should, is what companies said. And so they were doing all kinds of things to accommodate people to work at home, like resolving network issues. Some people were even giving people technologies, remote, making improvements, their intelligence that they could get from the plant to home. And they were also doing things to support and protect their employees, especially those that had to remain on site, like with PPE and other things that they were doing, like quarantining people and separating employees. And there were some plants where the some of the workers had to be on site, and that will probably remain so in the future. But there were also things like temperature checks, health checks, and so on, etc. But they also did a lot of things to add new technologies, like new networks for supporting remote technology. We talked to one company that had 30,000 workers that they had to get online within a week. So, and they did it, but they did have to add some new technologies to the network, and also security issues, cybersecurity around that. And then there were people that wanted remote dashboards. Some people wanted to reproduce the control room right in their house and have multiple screens so they could monitor the process and also make data driven decisions and alert people to emergencies or other issues. And so we also saw the technologies, newer technologies like virtual reality and augmented reality and digital twins being used a lot for the remote maintenance and also to help workers on site. We also saw artificial intelligence and robotics being implemented, and also analytics like AI. So COVID is an accelerator for the remote connected worker. So we also asked about what issues they had around the pandemic, and most of it came down to resolving the remote connected worker issues, being able to obtain real time data and information to the right worker at the right time, and also involved the supply chain because some companies were shutting down borders. They had countries where they would shut the border in one location, so they had to either shut that plant down and move operations to another plant. We saw one company that actually used a digital twin of the process so that they could relocate it to another country where the borders were open. And so we saw things like safety issues. And also, one thing that I thought was really good was that people were still focused on sustainability. And ultimately, they were all focused on keeping the business going. and running, and also the financials. They had to pay attention to that too. And there were a number of technologies from cloud computing to robotics to AI to adding cameras to mobile technologies, the digital twins, augmented reality that we were seeing because of COVID. So COVID was an accelerator for the remote connected worker. It was about really innovation and reimagining process. It was also about collaboration so that people could collaborate instead of making site visits, for example. They could do online training. They could do virtual factory acceptance tests. It was about installing new equipment virtually or with one worker on site and the others all remote so that they were separated. And also is about maintenance, upgrades, and patches, and also other newer connected digital technologies. And so ultimately, a lot of it came down to doing teamwork and collaboration remotely. So there's all kinds of devices today that can enable remote workers, whether they're on site remotely or at home. And these range from virtual reality, augmented reality, visualization with smart glasses that walk you through safety checks or maintenance or chatbots to exoskeletons, even robotics that can do activities that are maybe not safe for humans on site. So in the virtual doing virtual maintenance or the wearables was an interesting one where they were using that for where they were dressed up in hazmat suits and they would go into a room and they could click on the door and that would get them into the room so they didn't have to take their masks or their shields or other uh, the hazardous wear off so that they can use the watch to get in as opposed to touching anything because they had gloves on and glasses on. So when the pandemic is over later this year, will companies go back to the way things were before COVID regarding having remote workers? Well, we also surveyed companies and asked them that, and they said about 20 to 40% may never go back like before. However, there are some workers that would rather be on site, and then there's others that would really rather remain uh, remain working remotely at home, and they felt that they were more productive as well. So, and some companies said that, well, what we're going to do is just to make it fair, we're going to say 2 days you have to work at home and 2 to 3 days in the office. And then spoke to some workers that would rather have the camaraderie of working on site. So it's all different for different companies and different people and different and how people work together. And so some of the use cases today, you'll see what people are doing. So there's a lot of challenges for remote workers around their roles and the different needs of the types of workers, whether it's a plant worker, a field worker, an on site worker, and whether it's about the visualization, which should be human engineered so you get the right information at the right time. And it shouldn't take 8 weeks of training to learn how to use the technology. You should be able to use it fairly easily. It should be very minimal training. It should be more intuitive and simple. And and so these challenges are all being resolved in different ways by different companies. So we'll hear about that as we go through this session. And one of the things that came up, and there is challenges because every company has different environments and different technologies and different ones that they've implemented. And so what's the best thing to do? So, and then the other issue that came up in the environmental issue was remotely working from home seems ideal, but there was issues with separating areas or spaces from other activities like families and then in some cases people that were remote felt like they missed the camaraderie and the teammanship that goes with being on site. So so what did like for control room operators that became an issue also because which was the on-premise worker because in some situations the control room operator cannot operate from their home. They have to be on site. It's a requirement either from regulations or company safety requirement, but this became an issue during COVID. And some companies, what they do is they separated the control room operators into different teams so that, and then they washed and sanitized the control room between operators because they just don't have a lot of spare operators because these are very specially trained people. and they're needed to run the plant. And so if they lose all their operators to control COVID, it could be a disaster. They would have to shut down. And security is also an issue in different environments, whether it's cybersecurity from working from home and making virtual updates and maintenance and patches and so on. So all of these are issues and challenges for a remote connected worker. So there's also a lot of benefits from having remote connected workers, but everything needs to align with the corporate and business vision. So whether it's enhancing and improving the worker experience or having better process visibility, making database decisions, or improving performance and productivity. So take a look at the use case today and you'll see where folks in this session were able to get the greatest value. And so a few strategies for success for the remote connected worker are around investing in new processes for the remote connected worker, investing in new technologies, making it simple and intuitive, investing in people and in the remote connected worker, and also take a look at the use cases and get some ideas from these people. And it's also about the value and the return on investment. So it's about solving the business problems, and this needs to be part of the vision for the remote connected worker. And it requires connected people, processes, technology, and workplaces that address the digital transformation while improving productivity. So thank you again. That concludes my high-level presentation today about the remote connected worker. And as I mentioned, we'll have time for Q&A during the panel session. So I look forward to seeing you at the end of the session. Thank you.
Hello, and thank you for having me. My name is Brian Perlstein, and I'm here to talk about our program, Manufacturing Rocket, and our journey to enable our remote workforce to help maintain our operations. So, in 1957, a small satellite, Sputnik, was launched by the Soviet Union to the surprise and concern of other countries. Prior to this, countries such as the United States were working on rockets and satellites, but this was the call to action and was the spark that accelerated the focus and investment creating the space race. Prior to January 2020, manufacturing companies around the world were all talking about digital transformation and the value it would bring, all the while dipping their toes into proof of concepts, pilots, and some initial deployments. And just like Sputnik, the pandemic was the spark that kickstarted digital transformation, specifically in manufacturing. It is forcing companies and their employees to change how they operate, especially the behaviors and how we all as people interact and collaborate remotely to safely maintain our manufacturing operations. Today, I'm going to talk to you about this journey that OC is taking to better enable our remote workforce to support our manufacturing operations. But before I go on, let me pause and speak a little bit about Owens Corning. So Owens Corning is a global company with sales of about $7.2 billion in 2019. We are a company that is global in scope, but human in scale. We have people and products that make the world a better place through our three market-leading businesses: roofing, insulation, and glass fiber composites. Something I'm very proud of is that we are a component of the Dow Jones Sustainability World Index, and we've been there for 11 years. And each of our business is a world leader delivering a variety of insulation and roofing products to keep our homes, commercial buildings, and the people in them safe, comfortable, and dry. We also produce glass fiber in engineered composite materials that are used in everything from automobiles and bridges to wind energy and personal electronics. We have about 18,000 employees and a global presence in 33 countries. And 78% of those employees are traditionally located in manufacturing facilities. So if you think about space travel, there's a finite number of people that can be on the actual rocket. These astronauts are trained to support their mission, but they still rely on the subject matter experts supporting them in mission control. Take, for example, a recent issue at the International Space Station. A leak was detected, but its location was difficult to identify. The team of scientists on the International Space Station worked with the remote experts on Earth to come up with a solution to identify its location and patch it. Just like astronauts, our manufacturing facilities have people with a subset of expertise and operators with basic knowledge to support the operations. Our manufacturing facilities rely on our remote subject matter experts to help maintain and optimize the operations. Traditionally, this was done with some remote engagement, but more often than not, these subject matter experts travel to the facility so that they could clearly see and engage with the local staff or work on engineering designs for capital improvements. In some cases, plants actually required the subject matter experts to be on site before they resolved an issue. To me, this is like requiring someone from mission control to fly to the rocket or space station to help fix a glitch in the system. With the pandemic, the gaps in our manufacturing operational support capabilities came to light when the lockdown and safety protocols were all put in place. This was limiting who could be in our plants down to the bare essential staff. Even a large percentage of those people who normally worked at our manufacturing facilities were forced to work from home. Yet we still had to maintain normal operations, create that cohesive experience, all the while keeping people safe. This also impacted how we interacted with our suppliers, our integrators, and even our customers. If a machine went down, our vendors were not able to send people to our plant. If a customer had issues, we were not able to get people physically there. How do we maintain that same level of service that they expect when they cannot be there? Now, prior to COVID, we were already dealing with another challenge as well, and that was the loss of talent due to retirement. Some people then started using the pandemic as an opportunity to accelerate their retirement. And with scenarios like this, we had to think about how do we quickly and viably capture and codify their knowledge when they have to be remote. Now, just like all of you and your companies, when challenges arise, everyone is looking for solutions, sometimes grasping at straws to put out the fires that are popping up. How do we solve those problems and transform our operations with sustainable solutions that work at scale? And that they also ensure that the right information, knowledge, and expertise get to the point of need in a safe way. For example, we shouldn't be using things like WeChat or WhatsApp, FaceTime, et cetera, right? What is that enterprise application that we should be using? We also had to think about, there's been a lot of lessons learned through this pandemic. So what's our post-COVID plan? What do we want our company to look like coming out of this pandemic and moving forward? So, we had to really think about this and quickly identify how could we enable that real-time collaboration, support, and knowledge sharing across our global network of resources. We also had to take into consideration another challenge. Traditionally, again, we could work together, but now we had that new challenge. And that was, we are no longer in those common locations, and we also have, to be able to support our teams remotely, but also deal with other distractions such as, using our homes and dealing with those other, distractions that come and happen when we're all at home, right? I mean, I know I've been dealing with it, homeschools and things like that. So, how do you deal with this? And like I said, I know many of you experience the same challenges, sharing a space and managing all those challenges. So again, something else we had to think about. So what we came up with and what we did was we launched a program we called Manufacturing Rocket. And this happened to be Remote Owens Corning, Knowledge, Expertise, and Technology. And this program is about transforming how we work by applying those right capabilities to deliver that cohesive and collaborative experiences that enable our global talent to better integrate, codify, and exchange knowledge. The objective was to maximize our productivity by empowering that larger pool of workers across our manufacturing operations, the people that could be in the plant, right? With that information, that knowledge, and that expertise by unleashing the capacity of our global subject matter experts from wherever they were. So our first step really, in doing this was to enable that safe and secure virtual boots on the ground. Sorry here. We leveraged solutions such as remote expert software that allowed us to do things safely. And we wanted it to also be device agnostic, right? So that we had a little more flexibility for people to use the right devices, including things such as hands-free devices with hands-free capability, such as smart glasses. And we wanted solutions where people could capture information and collaborate with capabilities such as whiteboarding. Just as if you were in the office, how could you really, capture information, mark up things, and grow and capture ideas throughout this. We also wanted to make sure that, we put some standards in place. So another way of capturing information was through fixed cameras. And we wanted those solutions standardized to help enable people to be able to monitor those key processes in real time from wherever they were. And again, this was another area we wanted to focus. People were like, well, maybe we can go put Nest cameras in, or maybe we can go put these, random cameras that, use cloud applications to capture, to enable access, right? Well, this is our people, this is our safety, this is our company's intellectual property. And, we had to make sure that we able to provide a common standard that was safe and secure, again, for enabling that. Again, our focus is to enable those people and collaborate and capture information at the point of need to accelerate the decision-making and maintain our operations. With our initial focus, we were able to identify and deploy a remote expert solution globally that included 50 pairs of smart glasses and over 300 trained users. And we did this in just under 4 months. Now we have already created some supportable standards for process cameras, again, that our manufacturing teams can deploy when they need them, and do that in a way that we ensure we maintain our intellectual property and protect our employees. But let me take you and talk about stuff that probably really interests you. What are some real things that have happened? What did we really do? What are those use cases? So, one of the primary use cases is actually doing things more around construction and commissioning, right? How do we take and limit, instead of sending 10 or 12 engineers and integrators, various vendors all to a plant, how do we do that and limit that risk in the plant? So in this case here, you see someone, happen to be wearing a RealWear headset, hands-free, voice activated, and they happen to be working and capturing some information and sharing it back to the remote experts back. In this case, I think this was down south, and they were up north, was where the actual engineer was. And I think there was another engineer in Europe, right? So just as in the case, sharing, collaborating, and the actual engineer that was remote was actually had to guide this person in this use case to where they had to go. So that's just one use case in here. Another use case, and again, this person's not you see wearing the smart glasses, but we had someone actually using a smartphone, holding it up while they were troubleshooting a device, right? Doing a maintenance procedure to try to solve a problem with that remote engineer. And again, device agnostic, giving them those capabilities to capture that knowledge from anywhere in the world. They can engage and solve problems within minutes versus days, or sometimes, even longer if they have to, depending where in the world they are and how the person has to get out there and who you need. That's just some things that we had to take in consideration, making sure that a tool is easy to use so we can get any expert at any time to work with any person in the plant when they need it. Again, we'll talk about the collaboration and knowledge sharing, acceptance testing, construction walks, things like that, where you can get people to go in and look at any point in time, instead of flying out for a few days and going and inspecting it and then coming back a few weeks later. At any point in time, you can get a group of people, you can engage, you can, again, do that acceptance test. You can go through the punch list of things with a team of people who can actually see what's going on and ask the questions very easily. And I think that's key. The same thing goes for working with customers and getting out to places where you need that visibility, and you can also do it in a safe way. And then one of the reasons I actually like the hands-free capability of the smart glasses is because it keeps your hands free. So if you're trying to do something, you can actually use both your hands. You can make yourself safe in whichever way that you need to work. You can also, another piece about the collaboration and knowledge sharing is also about knowledge capture too, that you can use these headsets or the devices, to record and do things like 1-point lessons, short videos, right? Because in this day and age, who goes out and pulls a binder out to go and get some instructions, right? We all go out to YouTube, pull that video, and we make, get that what we need to do, right? So we have plants that are actually using these actually to make short videos to capture information and enable that knowledge sharing in an easy to do way. People said, I'm not going to read all these, but our down in our plants and across our network of integrators and customers, we've gotten very positive feedback about how easy it is, enabling people to engage and participate remotely, especially throughout this pandemic. Globally enabling people and keeping people up to speed on what's going on. The ability to interact and see what an individual is examining or doing, right? And it was much easier to give directions. Now, I'm just going to use the example of how many of us have had to try to help our parents with their computers at home when you're somewhere else and you're on the phone and you can't see what they're doing. And you're like, well, literally click this. And they're like, I clicked this. Now imagine if you could actually see what they actually were clicking. Think about it. How much easier would it be? So, through this program, obviously we're not going to just do something if for just no reason, right? There has to be some value drivers. Everything we do, we want to do added value to our business operations. And in this case, supporting that travel challenges, right? COVID-19 limited travel in 2020, but it's still limiting travel and what we can do. But also, we learned a lot through this pandemic. We learned that, man, we travel a lot, but we have the capabilities to really support our people and support our operations, our customers. Our integrators have the ability to support us without having to travel as much. And because of this, our businesses here at Owens Corning have actually said, let's try to reduce, and let's set that goal to reduce travel by 40 to 50%. It's not just about the dollars of reducing travel. It's not just the travel and expense costs of the flights, the hotels. Yeah, that adds up. But it's also a lot about operational efficiencies and productivity. If you think about this, every time I'm on a plane, I'm not as productive as I would be if I was someplace in an office or even working from home and I could, really collaborate. By creating tools for people to engage, we can unleash that capacity of our global SMEs. We can really understand who has what skills and really get in contact with them. You're not on a plane, you're not traveling, to go solve a problem for a few hours and then spending days to get back to where you were potentially, right? Makes that mean time to repair go down. We can do things much faster because as long as, in minutes, we can have that visibility to what's going on and get people already starting to work. And we also remove some of those biases that we naturally want to have when someone starts talking about a problem and we can't actually see what's going on. By actually being able to see what's going on, we get a better idea of what actually is happening, and then what steps we actually need to resolve that issue. Enable us to do it right the first time and do it faster. It's also about, creating a better and safer environment, right? Fewer people in a manufacturing environment makes it safer, right? Especially when you have people who aren't traditionally used to being in that space, who don't know all the ins and outs of the area. That puts things at people at potential risk, right? Keep only those essential workers in the plant. That's going to make people safer. And because we're creating this, putting these tools in place that create that shared visibility, it gives us improvements to understand what is going on. Again, ability to improvements that visibility and see what's going on. But more important to me, and maybe it's instead of being a hard value, but a soft value, is that work-life balance. And, this is about reducing the employee travel. Prior to COVID, 40, 50% of the time I'm on the road. Now I'm at home. I'm enjoying that time. I'm getting to spend time with my family, watch my child grow up. That's to me is intangible. That's critical piece of my life, and that just is huge. And I think for many people, they feel the same way. You can also think about some of the other things around this with the cost of sending people, right? When you think about it, you want hard dollars to this, the cost to send someone from the United States to China, $10,000 to $16,000. Think about the cost of downtime, unplanned downtime. And then when that downtime occurs, the cost of quality from the non-optimized state, the wasted materials, things like that, those things all add up. Think about when you're traveling, the risk you can put yourself at, especially right now with COVID, right? You're going to an airport where there's a lot of people. Yes, you're wearing a mask. You can do everything you want to do, but you take your mask off for a minute or two or a few minutes to eat some food, drink some water, put yourself at risk. You're getting on a plane, close contact with people, right? And again, putting yourself at risk. You're getting in a car. Then you take that carry it over to a plant. If you got a lot of people in plant, that plant's going to, who were potentially be infected with that or had to quarantine because somebody got infected, you potentially could take that plant down. What would that cost be to shut that plant down for 10 to 14 days? Very significant. And then you think about the cost of tools such as smart glasses or even just software that you can use with a mobile device, your mobile phone, a tablet, even your laptop, right? I mean, a couple $1,000s. That is significant. That return is one use. One use is that return. So just something to consider. So I want to talk about, throughout this, what have we learned? What's gone well, right? And, when I think about what's gone well, first and foremost, we're enabling, our critical projects and our manufacturing operations to continue. But another thing that's gone well is, we're showcasing that, hey, go small to go fast. We can quickly validate use cases, get those wins, and then look to iteratively add capabilities. And that's really done great. Here's that use case. Here's another use case. Keep adding on. People, we're getting use cases every day that we can add on and try and learn and scale. And we can go fast. Again, in a few months, we're able to deploy this solution globally. And because we're doing this, we're building, really strong relationships that, the businesses are pulling at this tool. They're not waiting for something and getting frustrated, right? They're getting it fast. They're willing to take the iterations, the time that it takes to get those different iterations, and they're pulling and they want it more. And again, another piece around this I would also add is the improved standards, right? These things went well. People taking on and accepting these improved capabilities and these improved standards. Challenges. Android devices in our environment, they're non-standard. So we've struggled a little bit with that. How do we get connectivity? Today we're using LTE to get that connectivity in most of our spaces. But we're working through that, and it's a challenge. Just as also managing these devices globally, like what's the right way that we can manage and control these devices? So we've been actively working through that and scaling through that. And then just balancing these new requests. Like I said, we're deploying fast, we're going out, we're getting constantly more and more requests, but we got to be able to get them out, have an easy, good way of training those people and getting them to capture knowledge. And what could we have done differently? When I think about this, probably improve how we sourced them, how we deployed them out. Again, maybe step back a little bit more, come up with a little bit better plan. But, that's, again, why we take a step back and we look at what we could do and think about this going forward. How do we do it better? And then the other thing is, just improving some things around some communications and some training around the program itself. Where are we headed? In our journey, we're not just looking for ways to support the remote worker with the remote expert, right? But we want to create sustainable use of these solutions by continuously, again, iterating on those capabilities, improving those capabilities. This is also looking at how we can better enable our people who are on the front lines in the plant. We want to give them that, again, make that digital information accessible in transformative ways to them. Ways that they're not used to, making sure that they're getting the information that they need and understand how to do the job right, to keep our manufacturing lines optimized and running well. Call it information at the point of need. And so some of these things that we want to do are, again, providing them ability to capture videos, but also use videos and take those and create those digital work instructions, create improved training. We're not just looking at one tool, right? This is a toolbox, and we want to make sure that we create some other capabilities, improved employee training using things like virtual reality, right? Virtual reality is shown to create the same muscle memory as if you actually do the job itself. And it's much better than just watching videos or watching somebody else do the job. Working on that engineering and commissioning and design work, right? And enabling that integration of the physical and digital world so they can actually see what does it look like in the physical space with the new designs, and how will it interact with the space and people will interact with it. I think, the other pieces around this is giving people information, again, at the point of need, creating the ability to have virtual gauges and notifications, via your process, whether it's your, that or your assets, what's going on, not having to go back to an HMI or have to worry about your laptop, having it in a way that's, with you, easy to access, and still enables you to do your job safely, right? It's about safely empowering our workforce with information, knowledge, expertise at that point of need. So, this is our journey. We're still going on it. The journey's continuing, and I'd like to thank you, and I hope you enjoyed my session. Have a great day.
Hi, this is Scott Carter. I'm participating on the Remote Connected Worker Forum as part of ARC's forum this February. And so I'm making a presentation on evolution of the subject matter expert and remote support. And I wanted to share some observations I have. So a little bit of background on me. I've worked in the heavy industry, mainly pulp and paper, for over 30 years, and recently retired from a premier pulp and paper company where I was an innovation leader, had an opportunity to spend a lot of time thinking and theorizing on digital transformation and remote support. So I kind of wanted to focus on the evolution of the subject matter expert and that role, and specifically on the remote support. And I think that ties in kind of with some of the thoughts of this forum. So I guess my purpose is to provide a knowledge share on the evolving role of the subject matter expert. And I'll refer to that as an SME from now on for, to be more succinct. And how that's enabled by technology, and specifically in this time, how that's been accelerated by the pandemic. Want to use 3 thought processes, kind of part of a mental model that subject matter experts are impacted by talent, knowledge, and technology. And that ties back into, I think, this remote work, remote support, remote optimization. And I have found it useful to organize the discussion, to use time in very broad phases of past, present, soon, and future. And that's going to tie back in, if you're listening or participating in this forum, kind of where is your team on this journey? In terms of talent, knowledge, and technology, where are you and where is your organization in very broad terms of past, present, soon, and future? And I found that those broad categories are much easier than, say, in a year from now, 2 years from now, 6 months from now, because once you start trying to put an actual calendar date on it, it gets pretty complicated. And I just find it easier to use this past, present, soon, and future. And all of you will be in a different place on this journey. So thinking about subject matter experts. So in the past, and possibly where you're at, maybe present, the subject matter experts spent a lot of time traveling to plants. And I was a subject matter expert at one time. My subject matter expertise was project management. And it was very common in the past, and maybe even where you're at today, that your subject matter experts, your support personnel of some form, some may be on site, but it's often they are either in some form of a regional area or somewhere they're in some type of centralized subject matter expert area, or home-based. But in any case, it's very common for these subject matter experts, which are critical, expensive assets, to spend a lot of their time traveling. And they might get up on a, Monday morning and get in a car and drive across a state or across multiple states to go to a manufacturing site, such that they can contribute and help and make a process better. Or they may go to the airport. And at that point, you spend money on a plane ticket and fly. And beyond the travel cost of an airplane ticket or gas or rental car, you've got hotels, food, and in general, they're away from home. So not unusual to travel on a Monday and spend 2 or 3 days at a manufacturing site, then travel back on a Friday. In broad terms, then you're 3/5 of your time you are productive, and 2/5 of your time are consumed in some form of travel, often referred to as windshield time. Again, there's a lot of cost associated with this, with travel expenses. And ultimately, there's some expense in that it's not unusual that these subject matter experts get burned out on travel, and you start having turnover, and then you lose these critical assets. Some of that is caused because there are minimal data connections. They're either rudimentary or non-existent. And also, you've got third-party vendors or strategic partners. And in many cases, they do not have any form of digital connection to the process. So again, to get your third-party or strategic vendor support, they often have to travel too. That leads to a lot of siloed knowledge, where the knowledge is kind of siloed into individual subject matter experts or individual strategic partner experts, and you don't have a lot of different significant data transfer throughout your process and system. So again, this is kind of a past state, maybe a present state. Maybe many of you can relate to this. So currently, because of the pandemic, plants were completely locked down with no travel. I don't know where your organizations are at now. You may have minimal travel. But in general, this pandemic, this last 2020, has accelerated a lot of change in remote support. Because what happened was your subject matter experts, whether they be centralized or regionalized or your third-party strategic vendor partner, they were not allowed to travel, so they couldn't visit the site either because the sites wouldn't let anyone in or because travel restricted or their own company may not have allowed them to travel. But for whatever reason, suddenly this travel model was no longer capable. And that led to a lot of people thinking very quickly about, well, what tools and technology do I have to support remote? And depending upon where you're at, some companies had adopted some digital transformation techniques early, and they're kind of winners and losers. If you've done digital transformation and you had more of a data-based approach and more digital connections, more data flowing, then you kind of were a winner in this situation because you'd already moved towards this new state. If a company had not done a digital transformation and they were using kind of a dated model, then they had to come up with tools and technology to do remote support often on the fly. And that works, but I mean, it wasn't optimized. So this pandemic has certainly accelerated change. So that leads to a discussion about this talent. So how is talent evolving at manufacturing sites? And this ties back into this remote support model, because in the past, all talent was at the manufacturing plant. There were a few shared subject matter experts and an occasional third party, but in general, plants were an island of their own world with their own talent, with their own subject matter expertise, their own tribal knowledge of how to run their process. Well, a trigger was retirements. There was a fair amount over the last 5 years, 10 years. Most major manufacturing organizations have been impacted by a surge of retirements, taking a lot of experience away. And in some cases, it was hard to replace that experience with other people. So it was seen as an opportunity that technology might be able to use to collect and analyze data. And maybe that data-based approach could be an alternative to the traditional experience model. So that's led to some changes in the present, but then also now we have this pandemic with accelerating change. So yeah, you still got most talent at plant, but you're doing more remote support, you're doing some more shared SMEs, and you're probably doing some more work with third-party strategic vendors. And that's leading you to think of a future state, which may be soon or maybe future, and that's a transition of talent at a plant, a vision that, well, you have enough talent at the plant to operate safely, but then you need to have a certain amount of insurance for some type of disruption or reliability event. So this insurance concept begins with, what do you need to run all the time? So if you are running all the time, then what is your minimal staffing, or what kind of staffing do you need? And then based upon that, you add extra for your insurance. And then each organization has to decide, how much insurance do you need? And usually that amount of insurance is going to be driven by the stability of your process. And then we believe that in the future, a plant will only have enough talent at the physical site to operate safely, and that the insurance will be minimized for reliability events. And that talent is going to be a discussion of what talent must be on site versus what can be regionalized, what can be centralized, what can be outsourced. And that leads to a very pointed discussion about technology and capabilities to do remote support. So this leads to an evolution of knowledge at the manufacturing site. So that's directly tied to talent, of course. But in the past, most knowledge was actually at the manufacturing site, and that knowledge is based on experience. But in present, most organizations are transitioning to where you can use remote support, remote monitoring, remote optimization to support those processes. And where you're at on that time scale of of knowledge at the plant versus remote kind of goes into this past, present, soon, and future. So do you have some remote support capabilities so that you can reduce the amount of knowledge required at this physical plant? And this pandemic is now accelerating this change because, again, it goes back to the can't travel. And in many cases, our travel is reduced. So, we're saying that soon you'll have more robust remote support processes to monitor, diagnose, provide analytics, even advanced controls with your plant systems. And then knowledge will start being based more on data analytics mixed with experience, but not completely dependent on experience. And we think the future state will be fully integrated knowledge systems where you have remote support and the manufacturing plants. But those decisions will now be made based upon data and analytics and not purely on experience. And we suggest that operations will be more stable and more efficient and optimized in this decision-based data analytics phase of the future. So again, that's then tied to the evolution of technology at the manufacturing sites, because you've got talent and you've got knowledge, but it's the technology that's going to be able to take advantage of the talent, be able to take advantage of the knowledge to make these significant changes. So again, in the past, you had your experienced operators and your subject matter experts who were running your process at the manufacturing sites based upon experience and a limited amount of technology. But the opportunity is now we have technology. It's relatively cheap, it's efficient, it's available, scalable to collect and analyze data. And that's going to change kind of how you view the role of an operator. And so I coined this phrase, samurai operator, where you have this operator that's like the samurai knight that manages your operations. And that operator works on day shift, and another operator comes in later and works on another shift, and each one of them has their own techniques and run things. And that's kind of the way things were in the past and possibly where you are today. But what we're seeing now is you can apply technology to collect and analyze data today such that you have that data and the decision-making capability associated with that data to help these experienced operators and subject matter experts. And soon, we believe that technology will provide even more data-based approach so that you can automate your processes and support experienced operators. So you're transitioning from an operator-driven process to a data-driven process with a future state where you now have technology that uses data, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and that kind of runs the plant. And your operator and subject matter experts are there to monitor and support that technology. And coin the phrase monitor-centric for that state, because now you're in a just run the process as smoothly and efficiently as possible. And the goal, again, is to not have upsets, to not have reliability events. And because of that, you can just run. And because of that, you can now use more remote support and have reduced people on site. So this slide is kind of an attempt to show a future state. And some of you maybe your present state, or you're going to be like this in the near future, or maybe soon. But if you can use remote support facilitated and driven by data, it gives you kind of a different business model. So now your various manufacturing sites are tied digitally into everything. So you have some form of digital system where you take information and data from these manufacturing sites and you put it into a central data lake. And now you've got these analytics tools associated with that data lake to help you make sense of this raw data and look at your process and see who's in control and who's out of control and what could be optimized. And then you have now your central or regional subject matter experts who are not physically sitting at the plant can look at this data remotely without travel. So now they're 5 days out of 5 days productive versus 3 days out of 5 days because they're not spending so much time traveling. And now they can look at this information, they can provide more support, and they can support more facilities. Instead of only supporting one facility because a traveler stays, they could support multiple facilities on the same day. And oh, by the way, now your third party or strategic vendors are also tied in digitally with your organization. And now you can use them to help troubleshoot their processes, or they can provide whatever it is, that expertise, or that either you don't have in-house, you choose not to have in-house, or maybe it's unique to this third party that you need to use. And then many organizations are moving towards some form of remote support center. And this remote support center has internal people, external people, maybe your subject matter experts are there, maybe your third party strategic vendors have a seat at the remote support center, and they are now using this data lake, these tools, this digital connection, such that they can monitor multiple sites and look for trends and help remote support, remote optimize through remote monitoring. So there are actually organizations that are doing this today. So this, in some organizations, is a present state. Some organizations are in the process of doing something like this, so it's be a soon state. And I would suggest that this will be the future state for most organizations. And that leads to kind of my final slide, which is a discussion really about circling back around, what does this mean at the plant level? And I spent a lot of my life at a plant, large plants. And I think it's interesting, I suggest that you're going to see an evolution of responsibility at manufacturing plants. And in many cases, this will be due to remote or shared support models. So now, or in the past, plants had very broad responsibility. So a plant was a little island that had any kind, it was like a little island or a little city that had any kind of knowledge, talent, capability, whatever they needed was on that plant site. And they had this operator-centric model where they used 30-year experienced employees to kind of run the plant, or plant managers were there for 30 years, or their process staff had been there for extended periods of time. So, and then they used a little bit of subject matter expert and very little remote support. But what I'm saying, that in some case a present state or a soon state will be that plant responsibilities will be narrower. And that will actually lead to an opportunity where maybe you don't need so many people on the actual physical site. Maybe there'll be a little bit of reduction of plant staff, because some of those capabilities that used to be at the plant will be moved to remote support or some form of shared support. And in turn, that's going to provide some opportunity dollars. There's some value there. And I believe that what's going to happen is it will continue to optimize and improve those processes such that in the future, a plant will just run. It'll be monitor-centric, and the plant will just be focused on making product, whatever that product might be, whether it's a board or roll of paper or pharmaceuticals or oil, mining, whatever it is. The plant will have a much narrower focus and be very, very efficient at just running some form of a product. And in turn, they'll depend upon remote and shared support for helping them with a data-based approach to make better decisions, because everything will be interconnected with digital tools, and there's a variety of those tools. Ultimately, that's going to provide even more value through opportunity dollars. And each organization will have to kind of see where they fit in on that. And so I kind of summarize this presentation with this formula at the bottom, which is talent plus technology accelerated by the pandemic will yield transformation. So that's kind of the end of the presentation, and now we'll be taking questions and discussion later. Thank you.
Welcome back, everybody. Glad to see our group of expertise who are willing to share some of their experience with you. And welcome back to our audience as well. And we hope that you got a lot out of the presentations. I thought they were terrific. And so what I'd like to start with on our panel is that you'll notice that we had a couple of experts join us. And what I'd like to do is have them just give us a short introduction on a little background so that you know what questions to ask. And in the meantime, please keep sending your questions in. We'd be glad to answer them. And you have this great group of people that can answer some of the questions that you might have. And they may have a different view. They may have the same view as you do, or it may be something completely different. So Mahesh, why don't I start with you? Mahesh Rege, could you introduce yourself? You're from Invista. Could you tell us a little about yourself or your background?
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Mahesh Rege. I work for Invista. And in my role, I'm heavily involved in digital transformation, particularly as it relates to transforming the role of a console operator, and involved some in how the effectiveness can be improved in the interaction between a console operator and a field operator. And how we can move towards a remote support model to improve our efficiency of operation and provide support perhaps in the most optimal way.
And that's really important today, especially there's plants where people could not, they had to work on site. That's what I was told, especially for regulations and some other reasons. And so what I'd like to do now is have Morgan Bowling, who is from Seek, introduce herself. And Seek is an advanced analytics company, but Seek is also a company that's been virtual from the beginning. So Morgan, could you talk a little bit about yourself and give us a high level
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me on the panel today. This is a subject, as Seek being a totally virtual company, is particularly interesting to us. So I'm a senior analytics engineer at Seek Corporation, and what we do at Seek is advanced analytics for process manufacturing. So we have hundreds of customers in oil and gas, petrochemicals, but also in pharmaceuticals, food and beverage. So basically, if you have a historian that has data in it, it's likely that you could find some benefit from deploying Seek advanced analytics across your enterprise. And as you mentioned, Janice, in terms of this particular panel, we've actually always been fully remote. But before joining Seek, I actually spent 6 years working at an oil and gas major in both supply chain logistics and refining and polyethylene manufacturing. So what's been really interesting in my role over the last year is I've been able to work with our customers and provide them advice around how to deploy these remote work operations, because I'm able to combine my unique perspective, having worked as a process engineer at the plant and understanding exactly what it takes to keep the plant running, but also have the virtual experience at Seek. So looking forward to the questions.
Okay. Well, we can start with the first question that I see that came up. And is anyone want to provide experience of RealWear versus using an Android, or I guess a mobile device, Android or iPhone handheld? Does anybody want to comment on that? Or
I can talk a little bit about that. So, I think when we wanted to provide a solution out, we wanted to be device agnostic. But when you think about the opportunity to go work in a plant, or you have a maintenance technician or even an operator out there, you want to think about how are they going to be able to do their job if they're engaging with that remote subject matter expert. And the RealWear, we've used RealWear. We've looked at other devices as well, but it has been phenomenal. It's got really great voice recognition. Even people with thicker accents, we've had no issues in loud environments. We've had no issues with it, and because of that, it allows our people to be hands-free. Now, there are cases again where this is not going to be perfect. I mean, this is a device you're wearing on your head, and you have to think about manufacturing operations. There are barriers you're not supposed to cross. There are things, that you have to get in and underneath or aim in different ways. And what I would say is that you have to look at that. How can I do my job, and how can I do it correctly? How do I do it safely? So probably for 60 or 70% of things we want to look at, going hands-free and wearing a headset is great. But there are cases where you're going to want to use something that gives you some more mobility, some more flexibility, such as an iPhone, Android tablet device. honestly, sometimes even a GoPro. That's how I would respond to that question. Anyone else?
Okay.
Well, I mean, I just shared, sometimes you just got to use what you have on hand.
Yeah.
So I mentioned earlier that everybody's in a different part of this do now, do soon, do future timeline. And if you're not advantaged, if you hadn't already gone into some form of better quality digital remote system, then if all you have is your handheld phone, then that's what you need to use and get the best value you can. And I think that kind of shows where different organizations are on the technology capability. So you just you got to do what you got to do with the best you have.
Agree.
Mahesh, I just saw another question about, could you talk about your vision for the connected worker of the future and some of the strategies that you're putting in place to achieve this vision?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I believe that a remote connected worker will help us transform multiple roles within our organization. For instance, the roles of console and field operators, I see them changing rapidly from operators to managers. Transformation of these roles will help us dramatically improve production efficiency by increasing effectiveness, reducing off-spec material, optimizing our processes continuously. And we can also capture value from step change improvement in process reliability by proactive asset surveillance, facilitating predictive maintenance, and providing expert guidance to avoid unplanned events. And some of the strategies that we are putting in place, we are working towards deploying data systems that will integrate operations and maintenance performance to provide insightful information to key stakeholders so as to empower proactive decision making. We are automating our processes to ensure that they transition efficiently from one operating state to another, train our operators using process simulators, and optimizing our processes 24/7 using multivariable process control technology. We look to automate any task that is viewed as dirty, difficult, dangerous, or disinteresting. I call them the 4Ds. We are also deploying AR/VR technologies to transform roles of our field operators and support capabilities. We are connecting systems of data to eliminate data silos, facilitate easier analysis of data by combining data from disparate systems, create dashboards that provide balanced scorecards that are meaningful to the business and operations. And all of these improvements will help elevate our capability to make database decisions more efficiently. And some of the important facets of the business operations, such as safety, reliability, and profitability, all of which have traditionally been managed daily, weekly, or monthly, we are now able to control them, many of them in real time. And leveraging these digital solutions and connected workers will enable us to push the boundaries to capture more and more real, measurable, and tangible value.
Thank you. There was another question. This one, I think I'll ask Morgan, is when you're working with the remote connect worker, of course, data is very important in getting that data. So could you talk a little bit about the data challenge and especially about where you're putting where you're seeing data being put? Is it all in the cloud or is it on premise or is it a combination? And does it matter for the remote connected worker?
Yeah, it definitely matters. And this is a question I would say we face with our customers almost on a daily basis. And the first and most important thing about this is data accessibility and also visibility for the whole organization, so that the whole organization can be empowered to make data-driven decisions. And the thing about these manufacturing plants is no matter where the users are at, we have to be able to access that data at a moment's notice to troubleshoot an issue and keep the plant running. The other thing that's came up in this session is that we also want to be able to access it on any device. So that might be our PC, that might be a tablet that the operator has in the field, that could be your phone. So we have to basically overcome those challenges of being able to access your data immediately and also anywhere. And so at Seek, what that has meant for us is while we connect to multiple different data sources, we don't actually care if the data is on premise or in the cloud, but we care about how the subject matter expert can access that data. So what we've seen is throughout the pandemic, a very rapid acceleration of Seek deployments and also other deployments. Running either in SaaS or in customers' private clouds on AWS and Azure. And so what this opens up is data accessibility, not only to the whole organization, but also, as Scott was mentioning, it opens up the ability for the whole organization. It opens up the ability for remote operations center to access that data. And it also allows now for vendors to do more remote troubleshooting without having to travel to site. And this could be people like OEM manufacturers of equipment. So we've seen cloud was already on the up and up, but we've just seen a tremendous up and up on and rapid acceleration of cloud adoption.
Okay, thank you. Anybody want to add to that or? Okay, but there is another question that's it's actually a very good question because it's one that comes up quite often. There's a lot of plants where you need intrinsic safety. And this one says, with intrinsic safety and double hearing protection being needed in my plant, are you running across these situations? So is anybody on the panel, have they ever run across it? I've heard a lot about it because we've seen technologies being held up because of that. And
Yeah, I mean,
cost.
some of our equipment is very loud and requires double hearing protection. But I think it goes back to, and I'll reference a previous presentation from one of my previous partners, Ben Blanchette, is where you kind of go, first of all, what are you trying to achieve? Kind of why are you trying to achieve it? And then you get into the technology to achieve it. And so we had a partnership with our IT organization. For them, we would try to frame up what are we trying to achieve, what value there is, why. Again, it goes back to that question of what are we trying to do to help at that site. And then usually the technology is out there. It's just a matter of justifying the technology and sometimes even going back and partnering with some type of third-party technology supplier to work through an issue like, hey, how will this work with double hearing protection?
So anybody else want to comment?
Yeah, I mean, I agree absolutely with what Scott had said here. We've got some areas where we got to consider intrinsically safe devices. I do not have to deal with the hearing protection, but I know I've spoken with people before. And again, that's where the challenge is, right? You got this device on your head, if you're looking at a headset, and now you got to fix both your earplugs and another device over it. There are vendors out there, again, but you got to find the right one that meets the requirements that you're trying to solve.
There's also requirements too, because I've seen the helmets and they got to be, I mean, you got to be able to throw, I see people throw them in the back of a truck often. Yeah. So I mean, it's got to be pretty rugged.
Yep.
So what about a question around behaviors and culture changes? Are you guys, do you guys have any thoughts on that? Anybody?
Well, I mean, I think, again, I'm more of a strategy guy, and the technology is not an issue. The main issue that you have to deal with is the organizational change and the cultural change to take advantage of the technology or to ask the right questions to get to the technology you need. So ultimately, digital transformation or any type of transformation is ultimately an organizational change discussion. And that is what I think makes or breaks most digital transformations. Is typically not that the technology doesn't work. And again, it's one of my mentors, Ben Blanchette. You got to be careful you're not chasing the bright shiny toy. You got to make sure that it's solving a business problem and then you apply the technology. So often when you have these types of discussions, people focus on the technology and forget that ultimately you're trying to solve a business problem. And normally, and that's what things I try to show in my presentation, there's a huge organizational change coming to heavy manufacturing. And the technology is going to facilitate that, and the pandemic is going to accelerate it. But ultimately, it's an organizational change.
I can add on that too. I think that, especially looking at the question around IT and OT paradigms and how those different organizations are working better, I think that, again, this situation that we were unexpectedly thrusted into has really accelerated a lot of that change in terms of IT and OT, but also in terms of engineering and operations. Because no longer could we say, well, that's just the way we've always done it. Or, oh, we need the engineer on site to troubleshoot this. We were all basically put into a new world. And I think it really opened up pathways and sped up the time to adopting some of these new technologies and increasing collaboration across those different organizations, because we had no other choice when we were all focusing on the same problem of keeping the plant running and the product coming out the door.
Yeah, I'll comment on that too. I agree with what both Morgan and Scott have said. I think technology is probably the easier piece of this puzzle. And like Scott said, it's a lot about organization change. We've started to look at any kind of digital transformation effort along three dimensions: people, process, and technology. And so it's about, we had a lot of digital transformation efforts ongoing, even pre-pandemic. But really, after the pandemic hit us, what we found was the adoption of the technology that we were putting in place was accelerated. So the technology was there, but we found that people were not necessarily using it to the extent that they could. And after COVID, we just saw that the adoption rate improved a lot, which is where we started getting the value from people working remotely. And it's not just the people side of it, it's also work processes. So if you have data coming in, how does that integrate with the work process that you have? And maybe you need to come up with new and improved work processes as you start looking at data, start getting your workers to collaborate remotely.
Okay, there was another question that came in from someone about, does anyone see the loss of face-to-face collaboration value being an issue as we try to move from the work environment into a more remote or virtual environment? So you want to start with Brian, and then we'll
Sure.
move.
I mean, I absolutely agree. We need that face-to-face time, right? But the question is, do we need it as much? I like being around people. I'm a person who likes to ask questions and whiteboard and draw things up. And this is where you got to think about, what are the tools? And, it goes back to asking the right questions. You heard in the prior session from Ben, and Scott said the same thing, and all saying the same similar things. Asking their questions is, what information do we need? What capabilities do we need to do our jobs properly? Not do it the old way we used to do it. What do we need to do our jobs properly? So looking at, to bring this around and say, well, how can we maintain that collaboration and engagement? Well, it's about providing the right tools, getting a really good whiteboarding technology. We have one out there that we've used in it's a smaller scale, but it's phenomenal because you could engage in real time. When we were doing some remote stuff very early on in the pandemic, pulling some folks together that were used to being all in similar space, they were actually all able to engage, actually all able to collaborate, put information right up in front of you, draw things out. And that's, that keeps the conversation flowing. Where I find problems is when people go, well, it's out on this, Dropbox share or whatever, the share over here, go pull this Word document. Everyone, did you look at the Word document? Are you doing this? That's where remote collaboration doesn't work. It's all about the capabilities to engage and communicate and share information quickly.
Agreed. So anybody else want to comment or?
This
Okay,
one's
so
funny because we were actually talking about it as the panelists before the session actually started. So I think it's the question on everyone's mind in terms of where we go. And I would say, even as a virtual company, there's been times this year when I've been like, if we could just get in a room and get this done, it would be so much faster. So I think that there still will be place for that face-to-face collaboration, but exactly how Brian said, it's just, do we need as much as maybe we used to have to still be as effective?
well, there is another question. It's kind of an add-on to that. There is a proven value in the history of industry face-to-face, boots on the ground approach to resolving issues with extreme benefits to production. It says tasks that can be realized through a remote view or conversation. How is that being compensated for? So it's kind of like almost the same issue.
I would say this, it shouldn't go away. It's not going to completely go away. What we're going to do is we're going to augment this. We're going to reduce the amount of travel. If you think about how disruptive travel actually can be to people, both the person who's traveling, but also when you go into a plant, now you've got to pull people away. They've got to engage with that person who's traveling, who's expecting their time. And maybe you really only need them for an hour. So now I've traveled out to a location for an hour. I've done some additional walkarounds, whatever. And meanwhile, there's that whole subset of productivity that I lost from that travel time, also being in this location, that I could be using my skill set elsewhere. So you have to balance that out. There are things, if you think about lean and the concept around lean, there are those cases you want to do those Gemba walks and actually see what's going on. So it's again, to me, it's just a balance.
I mean, I think it goes back to that discussion about organizational and cultural change. And I've been in many large manufacturing sites that had like quarterly senior leader visits, and they would come visit the site, do a little bit of a walkthrough and talk to the site and see how they're performing and do a bunch of presentations. And they brought a bunch of people with them, and it was interesting that you think about if a senior leader's got, I'm gonna throw a number out, 10 plants, and they got to do 10 quarterly visits in 4 quarters. How much time are they spending traveling, and they're dragging a bunch of people with them versus doing a Zoom or doing something like this. So is there value being boots on the ground? Yes. But I think, again, COVID has accelerated this because it was like, you cannot go to the plant. I was a traveler, and, just like one day I'm traveling and next day it's like, thou shalt not go to a plant. Because there was no chance whatsoever of bringing COVID in, shutting the plant down. If you're not absolutely positively essential, you don't get to the gate. Your badge will not work. And so I think that this has been a huge cultural change event. We were talking earlier, and the panelists were talking about, well, I'd love to go to these events, and then it's not, there's great value in the sidebar conversations, past this presentation. And normally in a presentation like this, as soon as it ended, people would come up and continue the conversation. Whereas in a few moments, we're just going to go stop and turn it off. So again, the technology is there. You're just going to have to figure out how to organizationally, culturally change to take full advantage of it, and work through. There's going to be a new normal.
Okay, there was another question that came in. Well, actually, it kind of a combination of that, but actually, I actually have had this happen to me. If you bring your audio into a dealership, are you okay with someone in Germany remotely listening to the vehicle and making the decision on the repair? And personally, I would be fine with it. In fact, I had that issue with my refrigerator. I couldn't figure out what was wrong with it, and it was making this noise. And just by listening to the noise, and it could be a machine listening to it for that matter, it ultimately would come up and tell you exactly what's wrong with it. And it was right on the money. So anyway, I don't know if other people have had that experience too in the plant.
I mean, I've had a unique opportunity to travel the world and see people in action. And some of the people that we went and saw were based upon ARC visits, presenters. That I've been in Chile to a control room that was 1,000 miles away from a copper mine. And they were literally operating a copper mine from 1,000 miles away, operating the equipment. And one of the pieces of equipment was this giant jackhammer that was breaking up big rock and a little rock so it would fit on a conveyor so it could be the ore could be extracted. So again, obviously there is not a technology issue. If you can do that 1,000 miles away, and I will share with you as you look at some of this stuff, if you can do some of this stuff from 100 yards away in a plant, then you can do it a mile away. And if you can do it a mile away, then suddenly, again, it becomes a technology discussion of can you do it 1,000 miles away. So it really gets down to how much are you willing to change, because in most cases the technology is already available. If it's not available, it'll be soon available. And the only thing keeping the technology being available is not enough demand yet. So
From
Anybody
our
else?
perspective, that goes all the way back to just data accessibility. So as long as you get the right information in front of that expert, whether that be on my side, historian data that we're connected to, or
We lost her. Okay, I think we lost Morgan. I think she'll come back in a minute, but
I mean, I guess maybe while she were waiting for her to come back, I would just point back to, my presentation and what we were speaking about. We support a space station, we support satellites, we support lunar missions, actually prior to even all this technology, right? We did it thousands of miles, tens of thousands of miles away, So the capability is there. There's no reason to be concerned that people can't do it today. It's just, are you comfortable with it? Are you willing to let it happen?
my boss, Mike Carroll, pointed out years ago that in many cases we had better our personal home and what we do with our personal life technology is better than what we had at work. So just a bit, what Brian said, I mean, you'd pick up something in FaceTime with somebody in Europe or across the country. We've all got turn on and off our lights remotely at the house. So why shouldn't we expect that level of capability at our workplace, who in theory has more money to buy stuff than I do for my house?
Morgan, did you want to finish? Because we kind of lost you for a minute.
Yeah, I crashed there. I was just saying it's all about the data accessibility. So as long as you can get that information, whether it be that live camera feed or the access to those signals or those calculations to the expert, there's really no reason to not allow them to make the decision that they're specifically trained on making, whether they're right next to you or 1,000 miles away.
Okay, there was another question, and it was about the barriers to progress that any of the panelists face from legacy IT or OT paradigms when trying to drive change. Anybody want to comment on that?
Yeah, I'll start, maybe provide a perspective from some of the businesses I've worked in. That barrier is really huge, particularly if you have intellectual property, which is closely guarded, and you can't, you're not allowed to um, uh, share that data. You get that data only within your fences, and when you start working remotely, sometimes that data is not easily accessible. So I think that barrier can be huge. So I think developing some good systems and work processes around that is really critical. And the flip side of it is sometimes you have really good cybersecurity and such that's in place. But things can be so secure that sometimes people don't have a way of getting in very easily. And I've seen that happen too when you're trying to get access to the right systems remotely. So I think this aspect has got to be rationalized really well in order to make remote work and connected work very effective.
So anybody
when we started down our journey, I don't know, I'm gonna say 7 years ago. I mean, that was immediately everybody kind of went, "Whoa, intellectual property!" The cloud, whoa, and we really got past that very quickly. And I think part of that was, again, big company, a lot of lawyers, and from very early on, we saw when we started down this path that data, accessibility of data, as Morgan's been talking about, was going to be key. So early on, we partnered with our IT leadership, and we partnered with our lawyers that deal with intellectual property and those things, and made sure, again, organizational change, cultural change, we made sure they understand what we were trying to do, why we were trying to do it, and then got into the details of how. But I think the key is you've got to have those people on board fast. So my big skill set is project management, and I fielded a industry 4.0 type solution rapidly. It's like, how fast can you do it? And key to success was immediately I met with the IT organization and said, this is going to scare you to death. I need you on board. We need to partner on this. And again, that became a cultural organizational change discussion about what can we do and why can't we do it and why are we doing it, that led to technology success. But again, you've got to get those people on board early. The worst thing you can do is come up with some really cool solution and then go talk to the IT people, and then then you're guaranteed to run into a roadblock. And as we've done a lot of our projects, and of course I'm retired now, I'm talking, recently retired, but it was key that we actually had a team that included this IT group, these lawyers and all the various stakeholders from day one, so that they were part of it and then they could work through those rough edges or help us or guide us versus running into roadblocks later on.
Yeah, we sell OT software through IT organizations. And just like Scott said, the cloud was a huge and still continues to be in some organizations scary thing for IT. And I think just having those conversations early and often and making sure everyone keeps their eye on the end objective is helping bridge that. But it's definitely still a challenge that I would say almost every organization still faces.
Anyone else want to comment? I think at this point we're getting close to the end of the session. What I'd really like to do is go around the panel and just ask everybody to give one or two key takeaways from the session or from their experience that they think is important to the audience. And so why don't we start with you, Brian?
Yeah, I think some of the takeaways that people should take is, ask the right questions will drive the right solutions. If you don't ask the right questions and you try to lead with technology, you're not going to get the successes. You're not going to help people adopt the needs and the changes that you require in your thing. And the second takeaway I think is really important, especially in times like what we've been facing with the pandemic, is, great is the enemy of good. In order to go fast, you have to, accept, some iteration or the ability to iterate and start with something that's not perfect and just slowly iterate to get to where you need to be. That's going to enable you to go fast. It's going to enable your customers to be happier, and really be, keep your operations enabled. And the last thing I'd say is celebrate and communicate your successes, because that's going to help drive that pull that you need, right? Pushing the stuff down on people doesn't always work. You want that pull. So the more you communicate when you're successful, and the more you celebrate that, the more likely that people are going to pull from you.
Okay, Morgan, do you want to give one or two takeaways to the audience?
I would just say that more of kind of an open challenge, particularly for leaders within our organizations, is that when we do shift back to on-site working, not to just default back to doing things the way we always did them before. So this is really a chance for managers and leaders to lead by examples and adopt new best practices. So maybe you used to meet every day of the week, and now you've found you can do the same thing in 2 meetings a week. Maybe you trimmed some workload off of people's desks. Well, don't just bring it back when you go back to the office, because that's how it was always done. So I would just really challenge folks to look at the changes that have been made and keep the ones that are making you, but also your employees, more efficient, but also happier with those successes that they're getting on a day-to-day basis. So really do that internal reflection as we go back to the workplace.
Scott, would you like to comment?
Well, Brian kind of stole my, I'm always a fan of best is the enemy of good enough. But the key thing we have found, or I think, is you need to spend more time focusing on the why and less on the how. If you get the why issue resolved, then you'll get to how. But too often people start with how and don't ever get into the really details of why are they doing it. So anyway, focus on why, not how.
And the reason I stole this thunder is because I've been listening to Scott speak for 2 years.
And Mahesh, do you want to add?
Sure. I'd say involve key stakeholders early and engage them through the transformation process. Then do not attempt to execute any transformation in one big bang. Take small bite-sized steps. Seek for quick wins and communicate the results to create a pull, like Brian mentioned. And the final word is maybe don't create just a bunch of tools, but look for ways to transform the entire workflows and get your people involved so they make good use of all the technology that's coming their way.
Okay, well, I just want to say, first of all, thank you to everyone, to our speakers and the panelists that joined us today, and also to the audience, and which was a great audience, incidentally, because they sent a lot of great questions. And we hope you found this session very informative and interesting. And there's some other really great sessions after this one. So please stay tuned. And thank you again.